All right, as said, I'm Greg Beard. I've got 25 years of energy-focused experience, mostly investing in private equity in this space. I've led efforts at Apollo. I've been a partner at Riverstone. I started at Goldman Sachs in the early 90s, and today I run Stronghold Digital Mining that operates 2 waste coal reclamation facilities here in Pennsylvania, and we have co-located 2 data centers at those facilities, and I'll explain why this is so important to the stability and reliability of our grid here. So thank you for the invitation to speak today. I understand you have questions and probably suspicions about our activities and the environmental impacts of remediating waste coal. Pennsylvania is ground zero for the existence of this toxic waste. What I'm here to tell you is that Pennsylvania is the last place that remediating these toxic sites should be controversial. They're the cause of thousands of miles of toxic waterways to lakes and rivers, dozens of uncontrolled fires, and thousands of acres of ruined habitat for communities or animals. There are some good storytellers that are creating a controversy to spark public interest in raising money for their clients. Adding a Bitcoin to the story mix has attracted even more interest, clicks, and attention. So I'm here to tell the half of the story that isn't being told on why your predecessors on both sides of the aisle created a framework to promote the construction of these waste coal reclamation facilities and cooperated for decades in a bipartisan way to help clean up the state. So I'll quickly cover the history of where these sites, the waste came from, its impact on the air and water quality, and on the communities most affected. It's not just the environment. Jobs are also part of the story. And finally, I'll cover how the data centers that are mining Bitcoin are already making the electrical grid more stable and helping to moderate pricing spikes, both obviously beneficial to Pennsylvania residents. So coal has been mined in this state for well over 100 years. We should be proud of that. This is the coal that helped make steel, that was used to build a lot of our skyscrapers, bridges, and helped us win world wars. The problem is we use the good, higher BTU coal to make the steel or power. The lower quality material that came from out of the mines wasn't usable in the furnaces of the day and was left behind, usually in close proximity to the coal mine. That unusable waste contains a lot of pollutants: sulfur, xylene, benzene, toluene, and other cancer-causing stuff that used to be safely underground, but it was brought to the surface. Thankfully, that practice of leaving the waste behind ended in the late 70s, but not before more than 800 piles were created and left behind to pollute in perpetuity. They are called piles, but that's a misnomer. These are mountains of waste containing hundreds of millions of tons, possibly billions of tons. Its negative impact on land, water, and community cannot be overstated. Thousands of miles of impaired waterways from the water runoff, and dozens of piles that are currently burning uncontrolled without the emissions controls to protect us from the toxins that are released into the air. This isn't just a Pittsburgh or rural Pennsylvania problem. This impacted water makes it all the way to the water supplies of Philadelphia and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I invite you to come see the sites that we are currently remediating. What will become apparent to you is that the scale of the problem is too big and too costly to be moved to a landfill. And the idea of putting a few feet of topsoil on a 100-foot deep pile of waste might make it look better until it can be removed. The water runoff remains toxic. The only solution is to remediate land by removing that toxic waste. By the way, we remediate lands that have already been, quote, remediated with a topsoil and beach grass solution. So even those that have, are strong proponents of removing these sites, those that have been to the sites have admitted, this is the only way to clean this mess up with what we're doing. So here's a sample of water that is a result of this toxic runoff. This is why the rivers can run red. So the flashpoint that brings us together is that when we remediate, we use bulldozers, loaders to gather up the waste, and we haul it to one of our facilities, and we feed it into a specialized boiler that allows the waste to combust. It won't burn in regular thermal power plants, or it would have been burned already. About 20% of our flue gas contains carbon dioxide. So your predecessors saw the damage that waste coal does to our landscapes, and they put in incentives to utilize this advanced technology to clean up the waste. They knew something that has somehow been forgotten. These piles burn on their own. They release carbon into the atmosphere, as well as other truly toxic chemicals. So yes, the unfortunate reality is that today we do emit carbon, but that carbon will end up in the atmosphere anyway as the piles burn on their own. And when we burn it, we remove almost all the harmful toxins from the flue gas. So no, we aren't trading clean water for clean air. We are trading uncontrolled toxic air emissions from burning piles and toxic red water for EPA-approved emissions and clean water. And we replace a blighted moonscape with land that is once again habitable and suitable for humans and animals. The methane released on these piles has a 10 times greater impact than CO2. So leaving them as is not even better for the environment in the near term. The communities deserve to have the landscape restored. The coal mines and mining jobs are gone. What's left behind is a smoldering, toxic pile of waste coal. There are some of the poorest communities in the state, and it is a form of class warfare to let this continue. Environmental justice is cleaning up the mess. So we've been made out to be like a renegade power producers that are running terribly inefficient power plants that are polluting more than even regular thermal coal plants. Our plants were designed for remediation as a priority, not power production. The analogy would be to criticize a riding lawnmower for getting lower miles per gallon than a car. Our plants were designed for remediation. The creation of power is a byproduct that decreases the overall cost to consumers as we clean. The piles we clean up are prioritized by our own DEP. We are doing the work as directed by state environmental agencies, and we comply with these stringent standards set up by the EPA. The Inflation Reduction Act.
Greg, you have about a minute.
Okay, I'm gonna run out of time, but
Okay.
we'll do what I can do. The Inflation Reduction Act has incentives to remove carbon from the air. We are experimenting and working on ways to remove even the carbon from our waste stream, and I expect that we'll see it. We're seeing it nationwide. People are spending billions to remove very little carbon from the air. We should be doing it at our plant. On jobs, we employ more than 200 people. These are expensive employees, union jobs for the most part. And on Bitcoin, I hope someone asks me a question about it. I'm sort of running out of time to discuss it here. But
Well, I don't see any questions, so you can just keep talking for a while. We want to give you your full 20 minutes, and then we'll wait to see if any questions arise. So just keep going.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Let's see. So hey, on jobs, we employ 200 people. We spent hundreds of millions fixing these plants and building the data centers and the equipment that goes in them. Union electricians and engineers were used for the build out, and we pay wages that can support having a family and the building of communities. So on Bitcoin, it is energy intensive, and there are plenty of Bitcoin, quote, believers that would argue passionately about the utility of Bitcoin and the importance of the, quote, proof of work design that is key to create the largest decentralized network in the world. With apologies, but the world hasn't yet invented a 100% trustworthy corporation or government that can control the ledger and make the so-called inefficient design by design unnecessary. It is the community ownership of the ledger that made Bitcoin novel and relevant. So, and for the criminals out there, Bitcoin is a horrible way to transact. Every transaction, including your illegal ones, are recorded forever and hard to keep secret. So stick with cash, as most of you have already been doing. Bitcoin is a disruptive technology that will create winners and losers. With that comes debate and the potential for controversy. As we continue the transition to the use of blockchain, we should consider the implications, but it is reasonable to look at the implications of staying with the inefficiencies of the carbon and intensive brick and mortar banking system. I would agree that the traditional banking sector, with all of their buildings, branches, related employees commuting in their carbon-emitting cars, is not only expensive for consumers, but with all the embedded fees, but it's also carbon intensive. And no one that lived through the global financial crisis of 2008 or has access to today's news, literally today's news, would argue that the traditional banking system is safe with the bank failures that we're witnessing. The idea that Bitcoin miners are inefficient is a dated notion. The expense of the power has driven efficiency, meaning that market forces work. The equipment produced today is 10 times more power efficient than was produced just 5 years ago. And the innovations are continuing. One producer of machines has established a production line in Pittsburgh. And I hope that it is a Pittsburgh engineer that figures out how to make it even more efficient. So further, Bitcoin mining is going to happen, given the strength of the idea and the perception it is safer than many currency alternatives. Like, we Americans tend to just look at home, but would you rather have a Bitcoin or an Argentine peso? Like, their value is cut in half about every year. The point is that as the Bitcoin has happened, it's going to continue to happen, and in its current design, and as long as that stays true, it's going to continue to be mined. So let's let the mining continue to happen here, where we have the proper emissions controls, rather than elsewhere around the world where they may not. So I think this is important to understand about grid stability. So I'm an energy transition expert.
There's two questions, well, actually
Sure.
3 questions, including mine now. So why don't you finish up that last sentence or two,
Okay.
and then we'll go from there.
So sure, just to understand, as we create more solar and wind, these are intermittent sources of power. We have passed a test called Reg A that allows us to act and look like a battery to the grid. So meaning when power is needed to the grid, we can within minutes divert all the power being produced from the data center back to the grid, making it more stable. And it's at a fraction of the cost of what a grid scale battery would be. So there is no solution to the intermittency of solar and wind. And Bitcoin operations like ours, this is not a fantasy, it's currently happening. So you see power prices spike. We can, at the direction of the grid or our own direction, divert all of that power to the grid, making it more stable.
Oh.
And grid stability is the issue of the day. It's a $10 trillion problem nationwide, at least.
Okay, I'm going to take. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative and ask a question. I actually was back in 2021. We around budget time we inserted into, I think it was the tax code, a computer data center tax credit, giving tax refunds and tax exemptions moving forward to quote unquote computer data centers. And if this is too personal, you don't want to answer it, just it'll be good. Do you and other cryptocurrency mining operations take advantage of that tax credit?
Not directly. I think in fact, I would argue that our plants would not be running if it not were for Bitcoin. So I think in a way, Bitcoin is actually subsidizing the reclamation of the activities that we're doing here.
But that specific tax credit that was passed in 2021, I mean.
So I would say whenever we remediate lands, we take advantage of the tax credit.
I'm sorry, the tax credit is the purchase. I should have said this before. The tax, when data centers.
No, we do not.
Got it. Okay. Next question, Marty.
But I would lobby for you to change that. It's such a good thing for the state. And the miners are being built here in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That's
I was
engineering
just
jobs.
curious if that tax credit applies
We
to.
unfortunately not.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, Marty.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. I guess my question is, from the previous testimony that you've heard today, we had 3 other testifiers before you. Is there anything that you'd like to correct the record on? Anything from your position that needs to be corrected in prior testimony?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Sure. The ash that we produce is not the same type of ash that would be produced from a thermal plant. So waste coal, and many may know, produces a beneficial use ash that can be used, without liners. That could be used as a fertilizer. It could be used as a cap for a landfill. It is not toxic. In fact, in many cases, it's hauled back to the acidic sites where the waste coal came from to help balance that situation out. It helps make the water clean. So it's been described, I think, incorrectly by the prior woman giving testimony as a toxic ash. It is not that. So that is something that the record should reflect. Also, I heard that, Panther Creek is now producing 3 times the emissions it once produced. That's an effect of running. So the plant wasn't running, and you put a Bitcoin data center in, and we can then run again. So it is not the data center doesn't make it any more emittive. It's just a fact, is it running or not running? And that's what would come from. I think the idea of then now on to I can make noise pollution. We haven't gotten a single noise
I have two more speakers, so I just want to.
complaint. Okay.
Marty, was your question answered? Okay, got it. Okay, please.
We haven't. We're co-located with power plants. Power plants are not silent, so we don't have noise issues where we are. That issue is easily solved probably with the next generation of miners that will be immersed in a liquid that will make them silent. So that issue will go away on its own. And then as far as like, hey, the big debate, proof of work or proof of stake, those that want to modify the way Bitcoin is earned are welcome to create a fork, and the market forces will join that effort, or they won't. But I think the strength of being decentralized suggests that proof of work will be here to stay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Representative Otten?
Thank you, Chairman. So in my community, we have some of these data centers that are slated to be built on some pretty valuable open space. And so it's become a conversation where I live. And I guess for me, my introduction to Bitcoin was probably 15 years ago when my husband's best friend's 14-year-old son was mining Bitcoin in their basement, and we had no idea what he was doing. And, you know, we always joked that the FBI was going to come someday and knock on the door. Either it was going to be to recruit him or arrest him. So it was like a teenage thing to me at its introduction. It's now become something that friends of mine are talking about. My sister is in banking, and so she's very wary of it. It's apparently unregulated, high energy intensity, noisy, takes up lots of land. And so I guess my question is really around what's the future and sustainability of this? Because we all saw what happened with FTX in December. That caused a huge upset in this market, and instability that was devastating to some folks.
Okay, good question. I want to make sure there's time for Greg to answer that. Can you answer
Sure.
that?
I would say, hey, if Bitcoin is the bubble that it's been described earlier to be, then the issues just go away, right? It won't be mined, and it won't be an issue for anyone in the world. But the reason it's being gravitated toward is because people like it and trust the decentralized nature of it. There are issues around noise, which, as I said earlier, will be solved. But I would ask you to have the vision to look ahead. You think in 25 years you're going to be driving to the local bank and doing sort of normalized transactions. Decentralized finance is coming, and there will be those that still do that. But I think the younger generations have 5 or 10% of their portfolios in crypto. For better or for worse, the changing of the guard is happening. So I think it's important that Pennsylvania be a part of it and not be left behind.
Good. We have about a minute and a half. One quick question, one quick answer. Mary?
Well, thank you for your testimony, and considering that my daughter did a 74-page research paper on this topic, I find it fascinating. It is completely unregulated, and I don't really consider it to be a monetary bank as part of our banking and monetary system. It's just speculative gambling. But I was just commenting on what you were saying about it coming in the future. With regard to your mine reclamation, I have been up to Luzerne County and seen some of the things that have been going on up there. And while I would love for our environment to reach a zero emissions, I understand that we have this leftover of our industrial past that people are working on. So with regard to that, though, you're taking the tax credits is your company taking the tax credits that there are for the mine reclamation?
Which tax credits? I would say to the extent that we reclaim lands,
Yes.
we take the tax credits, correct.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have a member who had a question? We'll get that one real quick. I'm sorry, no? He's fine. Okay, real quick, Friel, but it has to be quick, and the answer has to be quick.
Just
No statements, just questions.
just real quick. So you mentioned that the market forces that will determine whether it's going to be this statement work or the workforce. Would same apply to the subsidies and the power grid? Is market for, if you didn't have subsidies for this, would you be building these data centers on site here, and would it be profitable without the subsidies?
I think, hey, waste coal reclamation without the subsidies would not happen. That is a certainty. The plants cost like about $500 million to build in today's dollars. You would never build them today. In fact, of the plants that we own, only one, the subsidies aren't enough. So if you want the problem to be cleaned up, increase the subsidies to cause it to be cleaned up. It is not, people are actually tearing down waste coal plants, not building them. And so I think you're at risk of living with this pollution for another 1,000 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your
pleasure.
testimony. We really appreciate it.